Why? My father and my mother taught me a lot of things about their journey from Puerto Rico to the United States in the 1950s. They taught me a love of country. They taught me a love of family. They taught me that I was not limited by my circumstances. But most of all, they told me and taught me how to ask why. Why did they leave? Why were we so poor? Why was it so hard to get ahead in the United States? Why didn't they speak the language? Why didn't they get an education? This has served me well throughout my life. When I grew up, my mother taught herself how to speak English watching I Love Lucy. Now, this might not sound like much of a challenge, so let me explain. Not being able to speak English meant that I didn't get help with homework. I didn't have help reviewing my work and essays. I didn't get much help with any math. You see, my father and my mother had a second and third grade education. They couldn't read, they could sign their names. But they knew how to encourage their children to do better than they had done. They wanted more for us than they even dreamed of for themselves. By the time I got to high school, I had become pretty good at studying, mostly because I was pretty stubborn. But also because I had the gift of a guidance counselor, Mrs. Maria Garces, who said to me that I was pretty smart and I should probably go to college. But we were poor. She handed me a college application. She said, go home and have your parents sign this application. I was pretty, excited and nervous, but I did what she said. I went home and had my parents sign the application. It was then that I noticed that it costs $25 to apply to Rutgers University. And as you probably saw from the family photos, there were a lot of us. I have 6 sisters and 2 brothers. We often had family stay with us, so $25 was a lot of money. So I went back to school. I had the application. My father signed it, but I handed it back to Mrs. Garces, and I said, I'm sorry, I can't go. I don't have $25. And Mrs. Garces reached down into her purse, and she wrote me a check for $25. What that lesson taught me was that Mrs. Garces knew that we were connected, that my destiny depended on her investment. $25 doesn't sound like a lot of money, I know, but it was her belief in me that was priceless. In fact, when we think about our success as a nation, when we think about what we want to achieve, we need to think about how interconnected we are, how my family is connected to your family, that your grandmother and my grandmother and all of us are connected. Our success depends on the success of everyone. We walk around, we don't look at people, we don't see the connection, and we think to each person is responsible for his or her own success. But the truth is that we as a nation depend on how well we invest in youth today, particularly minority youth. Now, I know everyone has seen the statistics a million times. By 2050, 46% of all US population will be people of color. In fact, children under 25 today make up 46%, but by 2050, they will be more than 40% of all children. In October of last year, for the first time in our nation's history, there were more babies born to parents of color than were not white babies. So we are already seeing a future in which the majority of children are children of color. You also have to understand that at the same time that we're seeing this increase in the number of minority children, we're seeing an incredible increase in life expectancy. People are living longer. In fact, the population of age 65 and over is expected to reach 21% by 2050. And it's not just the age 65 and over, it's the age 85 and over that's growing. We are aging as a population at the same time that we're becoming more and more brown. Now, we know that our life can change with education, and that education is in fact the most powerful weapon that we can use for our progress. But sadly, not every little girl and boy has access to education in this country. Sadly, whether you get a college education or not depends on who your parents are, where you live, whether you've had other non-parent adults influencing you, how much money you have. That opportunity has been limited to those who have privilege. Here's the reality. If you have a graduate degree, your child will go to college. You have a 73% chance if you have a doctoral degree that your child will have a graduate degree. But if your parents have less than a high school education, the likelihood of you going to college is only 6%. That's me. 6% chance of going to college. And I ask why? Why do we ask that children at 5 years of age be resilient? Can a child at 5 years old be resilient? Why is education important? Well, here's the reality. Educational attainment impacts the livelihood that you have. 50% of low-income children live in households where there are less than a high school diploma or a high school diploma. But if you looked at that same population in higher income households, 50% of those children, 8 and under, live in households with a bachelor's degree or greater. So if you have more education, you have more wealth. Here's the truth about living in America, that if you're poor, you live in poor communities. If you're wealthy, you live in healthy communities. In this country, if you are poor and grow up in a poor neighborhood, you are more likely to live in a neighborhood with more liquor stores than grocery stores. So what does that mean for the little girl who's poor and grows up poor? What are her chances of life ahead? Well, the truth is she'll probably have less access to care. The quality of that health care will be poor. She'll have less education. She'll live in lower quality housing. She'll live in an unhealthy community. And truth is, she will live sicker throughout her lifetime and probably die younger at a younger age than her parents do. In Puerto Rico alone, 83% of children, that's 325,000 children, 0 to 8, live in low-income households. There are only 17 other states in the whole country that have lower rates of low-income children. Why this matters, particularly for Latinos, is that as we grow and as we move into the future, there are more and more of the workforce will be made up of Latinos. Today, it's about 15%. In 2050, it'll be 30%. Education rates have been stifled among Latinos in particular, with a large proportion of Latinos within a 10-year period still achieving only a high school diploma or less. Why does education matter? Well, about 40 years ago, if you earned a high school diploma versus a bachelor's degree, your income was 40% higher. In 2010, if you earned a bachelor's degree instead of a high school diploma, your income was 74% larger. And in 2025, if you don't have a bachelor's degree, you will earn half of those that have a bachelor's degree if you only have a high school diploma. So the wealth gap is getting bigger. The connection is that health and education matter, and then in the end, if you are well educated, you will live about 5 years longer than if you're poorly educated. So I want to remind you of two facts that I want to make this point about interconnection with. The US population is aging, our life expectancy is longer, so there are more old people, and at the same time, the majority of the US population are born to families of color. And how do these two things collide? Can you see the connection? If we're going to sustain an economic powerhouse, if we're going to continue to thrive as a nation, if we're going to have the opportunity to be a leader in technology, in science, in all areas, in arts, we need an educated populace. But not just for that reason. We need an educated populace to sustain our entire social system. We are interconnected. In 1955, there were 9 workers for every retiree. So 9 people were paying into a system so that the retirement benefits can be drawn down. Today, there are about 3.4 workers for every retiree. And see, those are the two things colliding: more older adults, fewer opportunities for fewer workers. And by 2030, there will be 2 workers for every retiree in this country. And one of those retirees will be a person of color. So how might we think differently about investing in communities of color that are poor and disadvantaged and isolated and lack resources? How might we invest differently if we knew this interconnection? That our livelihoods as a nation depend on how well we invest in communities of color. So how are we doing? How do we invest in children compared to other groups? Well, we're not doing too good. The federal government spends only about 10% of its dollars in children. If you were to look at federal and state spending, the federal spending is a much smaller percentage in terms of seniors. I mean, state spending is smaller in seniors and federal spending is greater. But look at children. Only $8,000 are invested in children and $3,000 invested federally. So the money that's going into children is a lot less than it could be and should be. This is what I've been telling people is the real fiscal cliff. What's going to happen as the disparity and the difference between the wealthy and the less wealthy continue to grow? We are looking at a future in which half of the population has less access to care, less education, less wealth, less opportunity. But there's hope. There's something we can do about it, and we as a nation know how to make change at the social policy level. We've done it before, and we've learned our mistakes. We've expanded housing using public policy. We've expanded healthcare using public policy. We've expanded job opportunity using public policy. We can invest in children at the early age of 0. You know, there's a saying that says the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The next best time is today. With baby bonds, or child development accounts, we can cover about 50 to 75% of all newborns in need. This money will accrue throughout the lifetime so that by the time this person is 18 years old, they will have accrued some wealth. We can restrict those funds to education, buying a home, or investing in a business. Those things that we know build wealth, and wealth equals health. And for those of you who doubt that we can do this, I want to remind you of what happened in 2008. We had the worst economic situation of our history since the Depression, yet we were able to find $2.7 trillion to bail out banks. It would cost less than 3% of that amount to invest in child development bonds. This is what I think we can do as a nation Invest in children from zero so that the outcomes change. So let me go back to this $25 story. So I wrote this op-ed piece in the Trenton Times to acknowledge Mrs. Garces and her gift of $25. I told her that $25 investment not just got me into Rutgers University, but with that $25 investment and that experience of going to college, I went on to get my master's degree at the University of Kent in Canterbury, England. I came back to the United States and I got my master's degree in public administration. And as I was writing this letter to the Trenton Times, I was completing my PhD at Harvard University. A poor girl from Trenton with parents who had a second and third grade education getting a PhD at Harvard University. So when they say it can't be done, that investing doesn't work, I believe it does. It's what I do every day in my job is try to invest in communities and try to evaluate the outcomes in those communities. Investing in little girls like this one or any other little girl, little boy, so that she or he will reach their fullest potential is not just a question of their life and their family. It is a question of all of our lives. Every dream begins with a dreamer. Although always remember you have it within you, the patience and the strength and the passion to reach for the stars to change the world. My life began with two dreamers who loved this country and this island so much and their children so much that they left so that we can have greater opportunity. So now I don't ask why. My question is different. My question when it comes to investing in children and changing the outcome for everyone is why not? Thank you.